we have a moment right now where everybody's attention and a lot of the money is going to follow the carbon, but follow the water, follow the chemistry, follow the land use, follow the biodiversity, follow, like, all of it needs to be in there. So I just want to say, for every one of our initiatives and programs, we're tracking all the other critical KPIs that are going to be checked, all the other environmental impacts that we're addressing. And if it's a between equivalence, we're going to try to seek projects that are going to have multiple benefits beyond just carbon removal, but it's in the equation of how effective is it, what's the reach of this, and then can you scale it?
Hey, thanks for checking out the show. That's Louis Perkins, president at the solutions-oriented industry partner Apparel Impact Institute, or AII, an industry organization driving collaboration between fashion industry stakeholders. AII identifies, funds, and measures the impact of sector decarbonization solutions. Their aim is to be the industry-leading resource for all apparel brands that want to scale measurable impact. And if that sounds ambitious, well, it is, but if anyone's up for the task, it's Louis. You see, Louis has been recognized as one of Vogue Business's 100 Innovators, sustainability thought leaders at the forefront of sustainability, handpicked by Vogue Business editors. And he's been featured on the Earthshot Prize's expert advisory panel. Not to mention, he's got an impressive sustainability resume that includes time at the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. That's when I first met him. And Mohawk Industries. He's got an MBA from Emory, but perhaps more importantly, it's his passion. It's his drive. But I think ultimately it's his understanding of how it all ties together, how it all comes together, and what it's going to take to truly move us closer to that end goal. And that's what we spent much of our time talking about. More specifically, though, we spoke about circularity and redesigning systems for the future, financing solutions, specifically the concept of catalytic capital, what it will take to unlock the trillion-dollar fashion decarbonization opportunity, the importance of supplier engagement, and the importance of suppliers in general, the pivot point that drew him into the impact space in the first place, the importance of getting solutions out of the pilot phase cycle and moving into the era of scale and permanence, convincing and winning over investors, and so much more. If you're looking for as close to a masterclass in how sustainability in the fashion and apparel industry has evolved and where it's going, this is it. Louis unleashes a flurry of wisdom, insights, philosophies, and ultimately advice. He moves quickly through, but still dives deep into a lot of different topics and references so many resources that you'll want to familiarize yourself with. We've put most of those resource links in the show notes, so if you're one to dive in and take this as a launching point, well, there's plenty here for you to dig deep into. I'm going to leave it there, though, so you can get into it because, well, class is about to be in session. Without further ado, here's my chat with, or better yet, the masterclass led by Louis Perkins of the Apparel Impact Institute. Welcome to Good Things Happening, the show that explores the sustainability progress that's being made just under the surface at your favorite brand or company. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and these are the people making it happen. Louis Perkins, thank you so much for being here because I know you are busy. So good to see you, man. How are you doing?
I'm well, Derek. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm busy, yes, but you know what? I feel like that's like a currency everybody tries to throw around, like how busy we are. And so I kind of like to step out and go, I'm full. How's that?
I like that. Yeah, but when you're the president of an industry, driving force organization, you're really busy. So I acknowledge that. So I'm really grateful you're here. Where are you dialing in from? Where's home for you right now?
I'm back home today. I've been in Los Angeles earlier this week, but I got back home and I am in my office / living space in Oakland, California.
Awesome. Things are good up north, up your way?
And today, it's a beautiful day outside, and the weather's nice, and, yeah.
Well, we're coming off the heels, for me, I was at Sustainable Brands last week, and that's kind of apropos because that's where you and I met. And it was years ago we met. And quick introduction, you're the president, as I said, at the solutions-oriented industry partner, Apparel Impact Institute, AII. You guys are driving collaboration between fashion industry stakeholders. Your goal is to identify, fund, and measure the impact of, sector decarbonization solutions.
Yes.
Does that sound fair?
That's a mouthful, right?
That's
yes.
a mouthful. And here's something else too. This is a quote that I read from you, and I want to kick us off with this. The goal, you said, is to evaluate programs and solutions against a science-based, data-driven approach to really follow the carbon. I really like that phrase. To invest in those projects and solutions in the supply chain, which are going to yield the fastest and quickest route to reach those targets by 2030, as well as total decarbonization by 2050.
Yes.
There's a lot for us to unpack in there.
Yes.
Right? And I want to come back to that. But first, I want to go back to sustainable brands because that's where you and I met. But back then, you had a different title. You were at the Cradle to Cradle Institute.
That's right.
Yeah. What were you doing back then?
Yeah. So when you and I met, we were kicking off our focused work on circularity for apparel and textiles, and I had launched an initiative with the team and with some great partners called Fashion Positive. But to back up, what Cradle to Cradle was doing is we were the organization that had been launched by William McDonough and Michael Bromgart and their brilliant philosophy for designing a world in which everything gives back, right? Like natural systems, we emulate nature, we replicate nature in a way that falls under natural order. And so the Cradle to Cradle system was really about, in juxtaposition to a linear model of take, make, waste, which is not how nature operates, but that's how humanity operates.
Yep.
We would really try to redesign systems for the circular approach, which is not just around material flow. I mean, that's a really big part of it, which is the upcycling of materials back into other flows. And Cradle to Cradle was really looking at nutrients. Materials are nutrients.
Yep.
And they can go into a next system. So, I always like
technological or biological nutrients.
Technological or biological. Right. So, a lot of systems are a lot of assessments and certifications and schemes out there look at kind of evaluating, is this good or is this bad? And yeah, great. It's a great way to kind of frame it. Is this a good activity? Yes, it depends. And that is really what Cradle to Cradle got with, which is like, well, let's talk about the use phase of this and what is the intended role of this product and who's going to be exposed to it. Are you wearing it on your body? Are you putting it on your skin? Are you ingesting it? Are you breathing it? Are you sleeping on it? Like in me, on me, around me, right? That's some of the language that was coming out of the LOHAS movement, which also deeply integrates with sustainable brands around this idea of like making things that are good. So that's what we were doing. I could spend a whole hour talking about the brilliance of Cradle to Cradle, but it wasn't just about, can it be circulated? It was also, is it healthy and safe to be circulated, and in what use and in what exposure? And, a shampoo is going to end up in our water system, and you have fish that are going to have the surfactants and and how's that going to balance out? And then you've got lead, which you're like, hey, lead in lipstick, lead in a toy, lead in paint, lead, that's going to be exposed to humans and animals. You're like, no bueno. But what about lead that might be used as a solder or some kind of material in this iPhone that's going to get back into the system in a safe way and be upcycled to be used again? Like, maybe not a problem. Maybe that lead is okay. So don't demonize lead in products, but look at how are we using it? Where's it going to go next? And designing for material reutilization. What I also loved about that framework was that it was really about energy, water, and social. Like it also said regenerative systems are not just about regenerative materials. They're about regenerative humanity. They're about regenerative water. They're about, regenerative energy flow. And I liked that equity kind of approach to it. So anyway, that was Cradle to Cradle. And we were certifying products. So we were a third-party certification program that had a criteria that we were taking against, the making of things. And we were evaluating those and labeling them as basic bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, and getting them out into the world and really trying to grow a movement around that. So that's what I was doing when you and I met, and we had launched that fashion initiative, Fashion Positive, which was around designing materials to go into fashion products to be safe and circular and have positive impact.
So all of that with Cradle to Cradle, amazing. And Cradle to Cradle is still a well-recognized, renowned certification institute. What fascinates me, Lewis, and I want to get your opinion on this, Cradle to Cradle, the book, was written 2002, 2003, I can't remember, 20 years ago.
Yep.
And when you read it today and all of these things you're saying, it's the same exact conversation that we're having, right?
Yep.
And that book reads as if it was written last month. It's almost timeless. How do you feel about that? Because to me, it shouldn't read like it's timeless, a 20-year-old book like that. Or should it? What are your thoughts?
I think it should, because I'll tell you what I think. Cradle to Cradle is universal truth. And Bill and Michael tapped into that in a way and they channeled it, they delivered it, they brought it forward. The first time I read Cradle to Cradle, I was like, this makes so much sense, not in a way like it's blowing my mind with new concepts, but in a way that it's like coming home.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I don't think universal truths change when they are from the natural order of things, right? It is an abundance model theory based on how natural systems work, and those have not changed in 20 years, nor will they probably in 20 million years. So there's going to be elements of change within that larger ecosystem, but there are certain laws of natural order that we are all under, and we have forgotten that we are, in a way that the take, make, waste, extraction culture and society and capitalist structure we're under, not to demonize anyone or anything, but to say that system is on its last legs under its current iteration, primed for remodel, which I think is what we're all doing. We're not saying no, we're saying transition and change is required.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder to universal truth that book really focuses on, like, behaving, designing like nature does. Do it the way nature does. The solutions are there in nature. If we look around, that's where the solutions are. I want to look at your journey to where you're at here, because you're obviously, this space so well. You've been in it for so many years. Your educational pathway, though, I'm always fascinated by people's, college pathways, education, art history, and business. Really funny. That was sort of my background as well, at Washington and Lee, and then on for your MBA in marketing. How did those degrees, would you say, prepare you for what you're doing now? And I'm sure you weren't touching on anything in regards to sustainability, circularity, regenerative, anything back then when you were going to school. Is that fair to say?
Totally. And it's even though I have these sort of degrees, bachelor and master's with focus areas, I feel like I went to institutions that were really good at giving me a broad, W&L was a liberal arts school that, I took a lot of everything, including business classes, econ, psychology, history, science, all of that. And in business school, focused not only on the marketing side of it, but which I think to me was really important because it was also at the brand identity side, which I want to talk about. That's what got me into this, is our identities as companies, as brands, as products, and the humans who create them and then make up the collective of people that run them. And I also focused a lot on strategy and ended up getting into some technology build stuff because it was the late 90s, early 2000s. So we're getting ready for that first bubble crash of the .com, but it was a lot of emphasis on that. And all those pieces of that education, I had no clue what I was doing, to tell you the truth. To your point, like, sustainability did not exist as a discipline, as a job you could get. There were environmental stuff, but not from an MBA perspective. Right. My undergrad, was really to leave with a degree that I could go do sort of anything, recognizing that I could also do nothing and that I would probably need more education in order to get there. And so what brought me to life, and I think this is how I kind of like to run my internal compass to match my outside activities, is always to kind of listen to, I talk about universal truth, but there's also always an internal truth. And I was like, what is it that brings me alive? And then whatever that thing is, I'm going to lean into it because that's probably where my talents lie. It's at least where I'll be most excited and study harder and listen better and just get activated as a human. And so when I was in college, I started taking art classes as just a folly on the side of trying to figure out what I was going to major in freshman year, and was taking, everything. But I really was drawn to, art as communication, and art as a reflection of the times in which it's being produced. And at the end of freshman year, the head of the art studio department sat me down with all my drawings and paintings that I'd done we had 3 semesters, and over those 3 semesters, and looked at it and said, the business school is at that end of campus. You might want like, so you're telling me I'm not very talented. So I thought, well, if I can't do, then I'll go into the study of. And so I was not drawn to economics, business, finance, in any way, although I continued to take classes down there, and ultimately would go get an MBA. But I had to find the part that brought me alive within the business world too. And so art history was meaningful to me because I loved it as a reflection of times in which the art is being produced, that It tells you a lot about geopolitical, it tells you a lot about cultural, it tells you a lot about economic imbalances. Like if you look at art, it's usually in some kind of reflection. It's either being paid for by the church or the wealthy patrons, or ultimately, as you step into 19th and 20th century art, you're seeing more of that rising upper middle bourgeoisie class that's taking over and reacting to cultural, pushing and pulling and trying to make social commentary through contemporary art, And so all that to me was riveting as a reflection. And if I pull that forward to now, I think the fashion apparel sector is super interesting in the same way. Like art, like music, like theater, like literature, fashion is another communication piece that we use to communicate what's going on in the world, how we feel, how we align to that trend, or that, whether we're wearing outdoor apparel or we're wearing avant-garde, cutting edge, whether we're leaning into luxury, we're saying something about ourselves and our values and what we care about. And so, nobody's a fashionista and everybody's a fashionista, because whether you're on Birkenstocks and a Patagonia pullover, or whether you're putting on a Tom Ford suit, you are making choices and you are saying something about what you identify with and what you value. And sometimes it's just like what feels good. It's also like practical. So I just love that as a way to be able to utilize the voice of a sector and the voice of a category to be able to leverage values and identify that, which gets to like this next thing we'll dive into, which is like the role of the corporate in attaching its identity around what it stands for related to the goods and services that it's producing,
Yes, absolutely. And I think that idea of purpose, what was your moment though? Did you have a moment? So you're doing marketing, you go from art history, you're into marketing now.
Yeah.
You're kind of taking these steps. Did you have a moment though where you decided, hey, I'm seeing that there's a new direction I want to go into? You work away into sustainability strategist, you're working on clean air campagns.
Yeah.
You start to merge over, eventually finding your way over to Mohawk in a sustainability strategies role. But did you have a moment that you can remember where you're like, this is the direction I want to go in?
I do. And it was, what's interesting is, even though I, had that focus in MBA marketing, I've never actually had a marketing job. Now, I have been a project manager at an interactive marketing agency and managed accounts at 360i, which was a great company that I spent some time working and learned about like project management and account management. So it's really interesting, like all these things you pick up along the way. But I left business school and I went to go work for this mashup, roll-up, huge consultancy called March 1st that people who are in the tech space 25 years ago are going to remember this evolution of US Web, CKS, Mitchell Madison, and Whitman Hart, 4 big companies that were strategy, technology build, marketing agency, and design. And they all came together to create this mega consultancy where you saw a lot of the folks that were at traditional then Anderson Consulting, then to become Accenture, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey. A lot of people were defecting or going right into these new sexier .com consulting spaces, accelerators and all this. And this was like that. Our whole team I was hired out of the team out of Atlanta that came from Anderson / now Accenture. And so I was hired by the Accenture team, but then they all defected and built this new strategy team. So I was in strategy for technology, which is really interesting now too, because that work had me really center myself around process reengineering and business requirements to be able to execute on building things, right, and reaching new channels. And we're doing a lot of that at AII right now with technology and other things. But to back up to that moment, I think while I was focusing, I was taking a lot of the tech strategy classes in business school, and because that was the big trend. I mean, that was what was happening in the world in the 90s and early 2000s. I mean, it was all about e-commerce. That was a big. Right. And so my first assignment when I got to March 1st was to work on building out their e-commerce strategies for their, we were working with big companies like Saks Fifth Avenue and Water.com, which was owned by Suntory. And there were a bunch of things we were like building out. How are they going to leverage and build out their reach to consumers and with their products? But the moment that really was interesting to me were some classes that I was taking, and there were very few at Emory at the time, on corporate social responsibility. And when I had been in the art world, so when I left college with my art degree, I went to go work at an art museum. And I wanted to be a curator because I thought that's what I was supposed to be, because I was super interested in this whole history, reference point, art as a reflection of time it produced. I wanted to have a voice around curating art and all this. But there were not any jobs where I wanted to go in that. But I got tasked at the High Museum of Art to be on the team that was raising corporate dollars for the Olympic Games related to the Cultural Olympiad, the artwork that was going to be in Atlanta, which was partnering with the National Gallery out of DC, and it was partnering with other museums around the world. It was raising big corporate dollars from companies outside of Atlanta. I mean, this was Atlanta's moment to showcase itself as an international city. And so the arts was a big part of that. And I started to fundraise and build relationships with corporations. And it was that piece that was like corporate philanthropy and corporate sponsorship aligned towards an identity of the brand of the company to stand behind whatever it was trying to project about itself. And I saw banks that were sponsoring African art that may or may not have the proper lending practices around African American community, but wanted to acquire them as bank account holders. Yeah. But were their lending practices for home mortgages still predatory in the way they had been 25, 30 years before? I don't know, but it was like, is this an equitable system? I started, those seeds were planted, and even outside of the work I was doing, I would see like cosmetic companies sponsoring breast cancer research and thinking, because I was reading and learning about all this stuff in business school. Yeah. Are the chemicals potentially that are being used in these products carcinogens, reproductive toxicants, like all the stuff that would later come up with Cradle to Cradle, which was deeply what we were doing, was assessing products from cosmetics and personal care and skincare and all that.
Yep.
Going, So that's where these seeds of like, corporate social responsibility is not corporate sponsorship and philanthropy. It's not writing checks and putting your brand name on something that you want people to think you stand for. It's actually reformulating the business. It's recalculating the impact. It's looking at what you're making and what you're doing and the impact you have in the world, and ensuring that the values of the company related to products and services are aligned to what you're saying and who you want to be as a company. And already in the 90s and the 80s, social and labor practices in apparel were being slammed right and left around, equitable forced labor, sweatshops, children, employment and factories. And so you started to really see that the social movement was pushing the sector that way, and soon environmental would follow. And so all that was kind of coming alive for me. And so it set the stage for me 5 years into my tech consulting life to jump ship and go, I'm not feeling fed. This is not purpose driven. No offense. It's great to build out big technology platforms for big brand retailers or big companies, but I think I'm supposed to do something different. And I was drawing on that knowledge that I had acquired from raising corporate capital for the Olympic art exhibits and going to business school and listening to, what was being said in these very few corporate social responsibility focused classes. I was a member of Business for Students for Social Responsibility, which became Net Impact. I interned at Business for Social Responsibility between my first and second year of business school out here in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So all that was what I really cared about. When I got out of school, I went for a job that would pay me well and make sure that and I was a little dazzled by the excitement of the .com and the tech, which is still amazing.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I was going to come back to, wait a minute, why am I here? What am I doing?
Fascinating. And it's interesting to hear all of that. It's like an amalgamation of all of those things kind of coming together, piling on top before you've kind of found like this is where you're headed. You get this role at Mohawk, a big carpet company doing sustainable strategies, and on to cradle to cradle. Now at AII, let's talk about that because, I mean, you guys are a solutions-oriented industry partner.
Yep.
Right? You're bringing together, and I'm hearing a lot of the same language, right? Either transforming, partnering, working in the corporate space. You're bringing people together, though. You're bringing brands, manufacturers, and industry stakeholders together to select, fund, and scale these high-impact projects. You're really hoping to really dramatically and measurably improve sustainability outcomes in the apparel industry. 5 years on then, so you've been there since 2018.
Yep.
How's it going? How's it been? How's the progress been? Got a couple questions, but I'll just kind of say, how's the ride been for you?
It's so much fun, and I the work is daunting. The work is ambitious. It's stressful. It's like it's never going to feel like it's enough. And anybody who's worked in nonprofit and NGO, there's a lot of literature and language out there about how your heart is broken all the time. But I don't really ever feel that way because I feel like if you have the long game, you also know that you are carrying the torch for the whole evolutionary process. I was yesterday, I was with a wonderful human and leader in sustainability from her vantage point as a model, Amber Valletta in LA. And we were talking about this, like, what are we doing? Like, we're both about the same age. We're both like grappling, like, what do we do? We are carrying forward this amazing work to the next generation. And so I think there's a big part of that excites me about the daunting and ambitious work that we all have ahead of us. And AII, as you ask, is like really, to me, doing what I've wanted to do all along, which is to really drive impact. And I think that when I was pitched on this organization by Jason Kibbe, who was building it out as a concept over at Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And I had attended a retreat with Jason and some great people like Dr. Linda Greer and Nigel Topping, who was then at We Mean Business and then became climate champion with all the work that goes on with COP and a lot of other people. There was a small group, but it was a great group. And this all was being conceptualized and brands were being pulled together. This idea, and you said it at the beginning, of having a mission where you identify the things that are working and you help get them to scale. You resource them, you put them in a proper trajectory to accelerating scale. And I felt like, and even with a lot of the great work we were doing at Cradle to Cradle, so much of it felt pilot phase. And pilots are important because they get you going. But I felt like the industry was a little stuck in trying a new material or trying a new process, whether it's waterless dyeing or dry processing or a new, man-made cellulosic material made from agro waste, or like there's so many cool things that are popping up, but they get, sometimes put in sort of a partnership with a brand and they're under NDA, and you get the press release, you see the article in Vogue Business, or you see it in Business of Fashion, and you're like, oh, that's so cool. They're, this company is working on this cool technology. Then you never hear about it again.
Right.
It's just kind of gone. Maybe it showed up in a capsule collection, but you don't really hear about it again. And what I really liked about this idea that was pitched to me about what AI could be and what it could do, that made me go, sign me up. I would love to build this. was this idea of like, we're going to find all the things that are already proven and just figure out what those barriers are to scalability. And we're going to change the market drivers and the business drivers in a way that actually help get it to scale. We're going to participate in pooling industry resources as a collaboration. So it's not just one brand doing one thing with a supplier. It's going to be this whole collective industry approach across regions, across groups of suppliers, across, really working with, and I'll say learning from the suppliers too, like what works. Just because this technology sounds good on the outside and maybe you piloted it, do you feel like you can honestly give feedback on whether this is something you would really implement and scale within your own supply chain, within your own operations? So to me, just going back to the origin story of AII, which was a group of brands who are all members of the SAC, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, sitting down under the proverbial tree in Copenhagen at the Global Fashion Agenda one year and saying we need to create like an institute that's focused on impact and identifies and scales solutions that are ready to scale. And then the caveat I'll say to that is there was a lot that we knew was in the innovation gap and stuff that was kind of petering out at pilot. And we needed to go ahead and say, cut your losses or move forward, like in a sense, we need to move everything into a pre-seed pilot model scale trajectory where you would never do pre-seed and pilot if you aren't going to stick through from model to scale. And if you're going to get to pilot and there's something wrong with it, then you apply design thinking and you reiterate until you get it right, and you can move it out to modeling it across a different factory process or a different region or a different product category or whatever. And then when you prove it in multiple use, which demonstrates greater reach, then you're ready to, scale it. Right now it can be replicated across multiple uses. And that to me was this idea. It's almost like an accelerator, but beyond the early to that like later phase acceleration. So I kind of answered your question. How are we doing? You might be able to tell. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, you're so passionate about it, and I know you're making headway. You've talked about this. One of the questions I had was, what's the problem you're out to solve? But I think you just nailed a lot of it. But you've talked about this $1 trillion gap. Yeah. And I know there's a big issue with sort of holistic systemic change. We've often, worked in too many silos. Collaboration is really tough, or it seems to be. There's not enough investment there. I love that model that you're saying, kind of going from seed all the way to scale. Talk about that $1 trillion gap, though. I've read a bit about that where you've told us about that, but share that if you could.
Yeah, and the way we like to frame it, and it's actually what we put in the title of the report, was the $1 trillion opportunity, because I also have always felt like, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing, that when we start a lot of this work and it's being funded early on by, some corporate budget for testing out and trying new things and some philanthropy to test out and try new things. But until we move to a phase where it actually is going to make money for debt and equity investors, and it's important to call those out because they're a big part of the equation. Maybe they're not in the right form. Maybe equity investment needs to look more like sustainable impact investing, and maybe debt financing needs to look more like venture, solutions for financing with equitable, partnership. I mean, but the current model may not be right, or else it would also scale. So there's a couple things that it's like, you've got this opportunity to identify, okay, these are the things we want to finance to get to scale. And then you've got the barrier around money and why is the money not flowing? You talk to one person and they'll say, there's no problem. There's so much money out there. It's not a problem of access to money. It's about incentivizing the value chain to take on the money or to de-risk for the investor putting in the money. So it's like these two pieces that are like really pivotal, really critical. And there's other elements in there too. What we did was we worked on, we wanted to know first, like, where's the carbon? And we were really going to focus on scope 3 emissions because that's where Science-Based Targets initiative is really driving brand retailers to also tell their suppliers, you have to do this work. And so we wanted to empower the suppliers. We wanted to give suppliers resources, tools, solutions, and money, and better money and cheaper money if it wasn't grant dollars or subsidy. Then we wanted it to be as affordable as possible. And we wanted to somehow build a collective, collaborative approach so there was more leverage to de-risk. Like this is not one brand retailer telling you to take on this electric boiler or dry, technology for dry processing. This is like a group of 40 plus major brand retailers who are buying into the vision that AII has established from a data-driven, science-based approach to get these things to scale. So we started with understanding for scope 3, where is the carbon? And that led us to trying to understand where the money was. So the carbon, and I want to say also, we're going to talk a lot about carbon and carbon emissions. And I absolutely also feel like we can't just focus on the carbon. We have a moment right now where everybody's attention and a lot of the money is going to follow the carbon, but follow the water, follow the chemistry, follow the land use, follow the biodiversity, follow, like, all of it needs to be in there. So I just want to say, for every one of our initiatives and programs, we're tracking all the other critical KPIs that are going to be checked, all the other environmental impacts that we're addressing. And if it's a between equivalence, we're going to try to seek projects that are going to have multiple benefits beyond just carbon removal. But it's in the equation. How effective is it? What's the reach of this? And then can you scale it? So once we had that report on where the carbon is, and we wrote it with World Resource Institute and Michael Sadowski, who many people know, excellent guy, worked for Nike, got to know him through the circular economy work. He's been really a great partner in this, working with World Resource Institute and AII and other partners like the SAC to really help bring this stuff together, along with Emily McGarvey, myself. Emily McGarvey was at Target, then she worked with us, and now she's running sustainability with Room and Board. Just some great people out there. I want to just say we're part of the mental mind share of now. So once we knew where the carbon was and by percentages and stages, and it gave us this sort of framework on what interventions were necessary, we also knew what was scale ready and where there was an innovation gap. Like, we know we got to address coal on site in boilers, but we don't exactly know what the winners are. And we don't exactly have all the best solutions identified. And so they're going to be a little mid stage, and we need to move them to late stage. So we then literally went to the bank. HSBC had been funding us to do a lot of work since we got started, really from philanthropically, around just getting AII off the ground and being able to build out all this case to the industry and reach suppliers and recruit suppliers. They were matching funds with Clean by Design and helping us underwrite suppliers doing this work. And so it made a lot of sense that they also were interested, not just for themselves, but for the industry at large and for the commercial sector of banking at large, to understand where the money would come from and what opportunities there were. And so we then wrote this report with Fashion for Good, who was really interested in the equity investment piece. We were really interested in the debt financing piece, and we were interested in what level of corporate contribution, government funding, philanthropic funding, and subsidy would be required. So the report helped take all of those areas in the supply chain with all those interventions and map out an asset class wheel, like a pie chart that would say how much subsidy, grant, corporate contribution, debt, and equity would be required for dry processing. How much would be required for a renewable energy transition? How much would be required for next generation materials? And it really also demonstrated across a timeline of early, mid to late stage asset class use, from all those forms of money that would be needed. And that gave us this idea that, so this is a blended capital approach. There is not one arrow of a type of money, and there's not one type of investor. There's all hands on deck. And when you're talking about solutions for regenerative ag, renewable energy transition, and thermal heat technologies, you've left fashion and you're now in the world of all the big climate engagement and all the big solutions and funding and financing that's trying to go in and solve for decarbonizing with food and ag and land and energy and buildings and industrial applications and clean energy and just energy transitions and the global south. And that was my other goal, is wake everybody up. This is not going to be this little pot of money that the fashion industry is going to pull together. This is going to have tentacles in every financial institution on the planet, because they're all touching this sector.
And is it working? Let's talk about the progress you're making with all of this, because I often wonder, do you think we're doing enough? Is fashion and apparel textile industry? Is it doing enough fast enough? Are we in general doing enough fast enough? What's the progress you guys have made based on that vision, this report?
Yeah. So the answer is it's never, especially when you're inside and you're building your strategies and evaluating your work against objectives and key results and all that. I'm always going to be, we're really tough on ourselves, and we feel like what we hold accountable as progress inside AII versus what we hold accountable to our partners and what they're doing. It's never going to be good enough for us because we're just hard on ourselves. If you look at the meta and you're going to step back and you compare it to what's been happening, I think this is accelerating really fast. I think it's really taking on a whole new focus, a whole new seriousness. It is getting, as we've said, based in data, driven by science-based targets. This is a very much, I think we're now finally going about a lot of this in the same way. And what it means is, yes, we need better data, but we also have a lot of the data insights we need already. And we're always going to improve upon those data sets. And the best way to do it is actually start doing the impact work and then getting the new data and plugging it back into the larger data set. So we feel like all the data that AII is going to be collecting in factories around this work, because we're measuring every improvement that's happening from, like I said, not just carbon, but electricity, water, water use, chemical management, other things, and money, and the unlock of money. How much did it cost? What was the payback time period? Where did you get the capital to expand this? All that is such useful information as we start to replicate and scale it out. So we put out a goal 2 years ago to the industry. And I just want to say, I always find it funny when I read articles about us and they're like, AII is raising 250 million. I'm like, well, yes, we're pooling 250 million. What we're doing is we're calling the sector to build a donor pooled fund of $250 million from corporate treasury and philanthropy, inside and outside of brands, because it can come from financial institutions. It can come from family offices and foundations. It can come from, a lot of players who are incentivized to support this transition. So we're calling for that money, and we're raising it up and we're spending it down. It's all catalytic capital, which means it's all used as grants and subsidy. There's no return on investment back to AII or any of the lead partners from that money. So if everyone's pledges and where they are pooling in, and it's not just the 7 lead partners, well, there's 6, but we're going to announce 7 pretty soon. So hold tight. I can't say it today. But
all right.
8 partners who are in, plus all the other brand retailers that we're working with that are pooling their resources to support this supply chain transition, and other philanthropy we're bringing in. If everybody just maintained how much they were pooling in resources, we would deploy 100 million by 2030. So that's great news. Now, that being said, the market's doing this, the budgets are going up and down. And so a large part of what we're trying to do is educate the CFO and the corporate treasury teams at the brand retailers that if you don't have an investment strategy for your climate work, you don't have a climate strategy at your company. I kind of want to say that again.
Yeah, do it.
If you're a corporate CFO and you don't have an investment strategy and that's from all the asset classes you can work with, the sustainability budgets, the sourcing budgets, the pricing, the corporate treasury money, the philanthropy, all of it. If you're not thinking holistically around what is our role, what are we going to do to transition this? And you don't have to pay for it all. That $1 trillion is not all coming from you. If you read the report, you'll see most of it doesn't come from the brand retailer. But the brand retailer and the CFO has a very important role in establishing a strategy of influence with the catalytic money they can put into this to help structure, shift, identify, fund, and scale like AII, and to really set the stage for de-risking, incentivizing, capacity building around all the debt and equity to come in and take over, right? So that's really great. And I think that's where we're seeing the conversations are just getting more interesting, more engaging. We're being supported by Rockefeller Foundation to do some of this work on capital unlock. I also think it can't look like traditional debt. It can't look like the same old stuff. It's got to look new. It's got to be different in the sense that it has to solve for everybody's problem. And one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot is, when you look at the report and you see this huge portion that's over half of the trillion is debt financing, do we really think the solution is to put more debt on the backs of small, medium enterprise suppliers around the planet to make this transition? Or is there something new in terms of the vehicles we can create to bring other forms of capital in to help lower the cost of doing this work? And the answer is yes. And we're going to be off in retreat in 10 days with a group of brands, banks, commercial banks, development banks, and manufacturers and suppliers. And we're all the only 22 of us, and we're all doubling down on really trying to get in to move the needle forward towards activating some new financial tools and programs to start piloting out and saying, this is what can work. Can we replicate this across the supply chain?
This is really, it's big and it's bold. It's kind of like behind the scenes work. How do you feel like you're able to get this message out to the average consumer, the average industry person? Do they know about the work that you're doing? Because especially as you work with suppliers, all the work that you're doing with mills, there's a lot of science behind it. Does it feel like it's kind of reserved for sort of a certain class of the industry, if you will? Or do you feel like everybody has an understanding of what you're doing and what you guys are working on?
No, I think most don't actually. And I think I would say that what's hard about it is that if you're not at the table and you're not sort of in the meetings and you're not really engaging as a collaboration around the AII table with other suppliers and brand retailers and banks, then you're probably only getting a nuanced piece of it. And you're probably thinking, yeah, they're doing efficiency work and they're raising this grant making and giving grants to, people scaling efficiency, and that's all they're doing. I think there's a lot of perceptions out there that we're only doing a piece of it because people are, they don't have the bandwidth or the time or the resources to dive in and research what every nonprofit and NGO is doing right now. And there's a lot. Like we organized ourselves around this group called the Fashion Conveners with all the nonprofits and associations. And, I think there's like 10 or 12 of us around that table. And then below and beneath and around and beside all of us is like another 100 outside. And so just figuring out where to resource and join a Zoom call and read a report and all that, it's really hard for the companies. And so I just want to say, like, if they don't understand what we're doing, I understand that they don't understand what we're doing because you got to really pay attention in some ways. But I also think it's kind of simple, which is that we're pulling the industry attention, resource, mental mind share, supplier and brands, and we're all working together on finding things that work, and we're getting them to scale. So it's like get at the table and join us. I think manufacturers are oftentimes, well, I know they are left out of all of this, and we're communicating with them because we're pushing directives on them. We're telling them what they're going to have to do in order to remain competitive, but as an industry, they're traditionally not rewarded with longer term contracts or agreements. And that's a challenge. So what's in it for them? And is anybody asking them if these technologies will work? Like, what would be the barrier to implementing this? Just because it actually works, does it work for you? Does it work for your workers? Does it work for the products you're making? What can we learn from you? And I would say even AII recognizes that we will continue to do a better job in this space, shifting the perspective that the brand is the hero to the supplier is the hero, because ultimately this all relies on them being rewarded, incentivized, and through business and through livelihood and through, like, this is about, really making sure that the future looks like just fair and inclusive development of how we make our stuff, and I think that's a big piece that we can say it, we can talk about it, we can have a panel at a conference about it, but we got to put it into action. And I'll go on record and saying with AII, that's what we're really leaning into now is if we're an impact institute and we're about activating impact, then the most critical partner that we have at the table for co-designing, developing, resourcing, and building for is the supplier. This is their journey to support. The consumer is the last one you asked me about, and I think the consumer is so important to know about all of this work because the consumer is also confused, very confused, doesn't know, and you know this from your work because you also have to decide when you're at a brand retailer you're trying to pick which things am I going to join, which certifications am I going to put on my product? Does that certification actually mean anything to the consumer? Does the work behind it mean anything? is it, can we afford to do all this? And so you're making constant choices around how you want to reflect what you prioritize to your consumer, and also understand what they prioritize. Do they want us in labor, or do they want us in water? Do they want us in circularity, or do they want us in, and it's like, we got to do it all, but frankly, we can't do it all. Not with, the way we're resourcing it. And so, and the way you can do it all is you do it all with your partners, right? You get all the other peers in the industry to join you, and everybody shares the burden of the development. But I would say the consumer doesn't understand certain key things that are important, like, guess what? All of your clothes are made with coal. Even the brands that you hold up to be the most sustainable on the planet, and we can all think of who that is, then we all them and love them and talk about how great they are all the time. And they are great. They are great brands. And they too will be very honest to tell you, we have grids that are coal burning and natural gas burning. We have on-site coal and natural gas in the production of thermal heat to process. That's half the carbon. Like, we know it, and we're trying to solve for it, and we're trying to get it out, and we're trying to find a way to do that when we don't own these suppliers. So investing them, it becomes tricky. And which ones do we pick to invest in, and which ones do we not? Which is why an AII, if I was to plug, the model, which is you get them all together. So I think the consumer, we want them rabble rousing. We want them as activists. We want them out there like demanding better and more. But I think we need to do a better job of informing the consumer around the realities in a way that also doesn't demonize. And I'm just also going to go on record to say, even fast fashion, be careful to demonize it, because all the models are fast, by the way. Even if you don't call it a fast fashion company, all the models are way too fast. Yeah. All the models are not incentivizing in an equitable relationship with suppliers. All the models are pushing down price point. All the models are et cetera, et cetera. And so let's just step back for a minute and say, yes, we want to hold them accountable. It's probably important that you show up at Climate Week with a sign, like, keep it going, get involved. But let's get informed about how we're going to drive it and what's meaningful. And, I don't, there's actors out there playing every role of this. I'm the actor that's pro business, pro corporate, and really trying to help these companies do the right thing. And corporate social responsibility. Like, I love it. And I want to see it happen, because I believe in these humans that work at these companies. And I believe in the power that they all have to be leaders. And so that excites me. But I also think, consumers are confused, and there's probably a lot of work we can do to help.
Okay, whole bunch of things here. Well, I've got a few points. One, to those that are listening, welcome to your 3-unit course with Professor Lewis Perkins. All this, take notes. There's so many good things in here. What I'm really fascinated by is the work that AII is doing really is the action on what we have been talking about for years. It's one of the things I was not frustrated, but when I went to Sustainable Brands, it's been like a 7-year gap since I've been.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Great meeting of the minds. Yeah. Really great to have everybody together. But a lot of the sessions, I'm like, we've been complaining, talking about this for so many years, and it's the same things: scaling, collaboration, working through supply chains, focusing on carbon, focusing on all of it at the same time, getting buy-in, getting the money. You guys are actually now doing that, making that attempt, which I think is amazing, and bringing in the suppliers is so important. I'm really interested. I want to ask about the mill program, which was previously that Clean by Design program.
Yeah.
Your goal was to reach 2,000 mills by 2024. And those, you're saying that have implemented the resource efficiency programs that you guys have, they're reducing emissions, saving water, and they're saving money, right? I read $440,000 of savings after a little over a year. How close are you to that goal of getting that many mills involved? And what percent of all the mills, let's say, that are in the industry is that?
Yeah.
Why aren't more, would you say, coming on board? What's it going to take with those kind of savings? Do you think that more would say, hey, sign me up?
Yeah, I agree. And so the Clean by Design program, which we took over from the NRDC, Dr. Linda Greer, many of you may have heard of, created that program. She's still an advisor to AII and helping us with building out this portfolio of solutions, the climate solutions. But that program was designed to do the things that were going to put money back in the pockets of manufacturers. And it was started in China through the NRDC's team there in Beijing. And we still have some of those former NRDC employees who are on our team now, which is excellent. So we build a really interesting team of experts who've been in this work for a long time. And which is great, because to me it feels like that's the right direction, is to have those who are the practitioners really helping to build and drive a lot of this in partnership with the suppliers. And so the traditional model was to recruit suppliers. You get a bunch of brands around the table. We would sign NDAs. They would all give you their mill lists, tier 2, the mills, of which they're learning more about where the fabrics are coming from. And that's over half the carbon, most of the water, most of the chemicals that are being used. So it's the most kind of important stage of the process to focus on.
Right.
And so, and that 440,000 over, 12 to 18 months, or maybe it was 14-month payback, is also an average, right? So you've got some small, medium enterprises that may make a little bit less, but it's scalable to their budgets, right? And then you've got organizations that are making millions back within a year to a year and a half. And those suppliers are, thrilled, but it's also against a much larger budget, right? So $1 million savings against a multi-million-dollar energy and water bill, is very helpful. And to see that is great. And they can reapply that into other initiatives in the company. They're not required to put it into sustainability work. They can put it into other things they want to do to improve. They can put it into social labor practice work. They can put it into anything, really. So that's their savings to keep. And it's coming off lowering water bills and energy bills. So it's like you do these best practices, wrapping pipes, installing meters, recapturing heat. It's like building efficiency. It's back in the day when we would tell everybody to replace all the light bulbs with LEDs. And then your energy bill goes down and you recoup all that. It's the exact same thing, right? So one would think, what a no-brainer, but it's, time, and it's education, and it's reach, and it's getting into these regions and educating them. Hey, we have a program, and this is what the program does, and all that. So I think there's just a lot of the barrier was always to get very focused, busy, and oftentimes probably stressed out factory owners and managers to actually pause, take a moment, and come learn about an environmental program that could help them. And they're also being hit up by a lot of stuff too. So I say the brands are being hit up with a whole bunch of initiatives. So are the suppliers from the brands, and maybe from local organizations and programs that are out there that are trying to recruit them through their manufacturing associations and all. So really sorting through the static, which is one of the reasons why we created this climate solutions portfolio approach that we're building as all the programs, solutions, third-party partners, technologies that are proven against effectiveness, reach, and scale. And then that some of them we can give grant dollars and subsidy to, but some of them don't need it. They just need to be put into a central database to introduce suppliers. So as we build out, we know that the barrier is like the time that it takes to recruit and to convene in the country and all that. And we have local coordinators in those countries that are building out deeper relationships with manufacturing associations, et cetera. So I think, to answer your question on why hasn't it taken off, I think it's going to be, we're also now much more resourced to build out more, to pull more partners in. I did a podcast this morning, my podcast, Lewis and Friends, check it out.
We'll plug it.
Solutions portfolio, and when I was talking to the team over at PwC in India that's now going to come in and start doing a lot of tier 3 yarn prep, raw material processing into tier 2 fabric prep work with us. We just hadn't had that reach before. So now we're going to have more reach. We're going to have more programs, more things. So all that to be said, we just got to keep doing what we're doing and trying to break through the static, and also say, don't compete, join. If you're out there doing a program, rather than saying you have to do this one or that one, why don't we put it into a portfolio and evaluate them, and tell the supplier, choose your own adventure. Here's tools, here's some data, here's some case studies. We can make recommendations based on evaluating you and what you've got 10 boilers, they're running off natural gas. You've got, XYZ specs, you're making this type of product. Like our technical experts, third-party partners that we work with to go in can give you a roadmap report. You can choose from programs that may have funding available, subsidy available, and that's the vision of building out this portfolio, that you can log in and get all that. So I'm hoping that's going to accelerate things in a big way, because it's going to sort of leverage technology. And that doesn't mean that human relationships don't still matter, and that being around the table together in country with local citizens who are driving the work, who are building the strategies, let them tell us what to do. Let's build our tools around them. That's really important. So towards the 2000 goal, we're growing and accelerating. If you look at the number of facilities that we've done carbon benchmarking and baselining, we have a carbon tech assessment, which is step one, that Reset Carbon is our partner in with that, and SAC is using it, Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So we definitely are hitting those numbers from the step one, activating that into a efficiency program like Clean by Design, and now we'll have many others with other branded names by region in our portfolio that are equivalent programs for efficiency. Will be step two, and I'd say we're like halfway to the 2000 on that number, but we're it's kind of like the momentum is building in a way that now that we're doing these assessments, we're delivering these roadmaps. I think we're going to be accelerating past that pretty quickly. And we're also internally having conversations around, we want to be available to all suppliers that we can, and we want to build out our programs and tools in a way that you can find us and get recruited into this stuff and take advantage of these programs without AII having to come out and find you. And that's going to be small, medium enterprises as well. But we're also looking at sort of a high volume, high emitting strategy, which is that there are certain regions, certain suppliers that just by sheer volume of production are going to have the most carbon. And are we thinking effectively around the number of days left between now and 2030, and how to ensure that we're reaching many types of suppliers, but we're also focusing on trying to make the case and incentivize some of the largest carbon emitting producers out there to join this work and give them the tools and the support they need. Because if you can, knock out and check the box on decarbonizing the top 1,000 highest carbon emitting industrial parks and facilities in the sector, you're going to go a long way towards meeting that goal.
Yeah, that 80-20 rule, and that idea on that concept, you mentioned SMEs a few different times, and I know, let's say with the Fashion Climate Fund that you're working with, H&M Group, Lululemon, Target, PVH, and others. You've been able to draw in really big companies. Do smaller companies, small to mid-sized companies? I'm always fascinated by how big sometimes we call small to medium-sized companies are. But smaller brands, what role do they play? Smaller suppliers, those ones that you mentioned, can they come and still get involved with you guys?
Absolutely. And so when we were launched as AII, it was this idea that you initially would put in $150,000 a year as a brand retailer, and that, your money would go directly into supporting and subsidizing your suppliers to take on this work, as well as a percentage that helped build AII's ecosystem and team and get the work done. So, that sort of SG&A piece of like building and developing the organization at the same time that we wanted, 2/3 of the money to flow directly to suppliers, right? And we recognized there were a lot of brands that just didn't have $150,000 a year. I mean,
right.
The biggest ones, we were competing for every other membership dues and association and project fees and every other initiative. And so these budgets just didn't have it. And so we recognized that it would be really important that all the companies that had been doing Clean by Design with the NRDC and had been introduced to it, that were smaller, many of them were smaller, should come along on the journey and be part of us. That it wasn't about how much money you could put in. It was about your level of engagement and influence in the work. And so we set the bar at 3 facilities. If you could put, at the time it was 15,000, 5,000 to underwrite the cost of the facility work. We matched it. We had a grant from the Sustainable Trade Initiative, and we had funding coming in from Schmidt Family Foundation and HSBC's philanthropy. We could match those funds and lower the cost per facility to do the work and make it. And then the facility would put in some funds too, but no more than a third at the time, now a half, because the case has been made that they will split the costs. And moving forward, we won't even have to, because the case is really being made that we don't need to subsidize that anymore. They're going to get that money back anyway. But to answer your question, I think that it started with this idea that we would only work with the big ones, and we quickly realized that's not actually going to be as meaningful long term if we also help someone who, from a brand size, who wants to get started and make the case to them. And ultimately, we may not need their money as much as we need their engagement to nominate facilities to join in this global collaborative to say, these are the solutions we want facilities to be a part of. We're part of the Apparel Impact Institute's approach and theory of change. We, along with 50 plus other brand retailers, are joining this voice to introduce this to our suppliers, who are probably also making product for some of the others in this 50 plus brand retailer club that we've assembled. And so everybody's invited, and that's the thing. And obviously, we want them to resource the work in a way that meets their budget and also helps move them forward. And we're good at encouraging them to raise the bar and dig a little deeper in terms of their resources to support this work. But ultimately, once the case is made and the facility feels incentivized to take on this work because they see the business value in it, they're not going to be so compelled. The brands aren't going to be so required and necessary long term to underwrite a lot of the early stage work. And there will be other ways in which the brands can participate. And some of that's money, but it's a lot of other things too.
It's good. And I know, man, I've been able, you've thrown a lot at me without me having to ask questions. So Lewis, I really appreciate that.
Great job guiding me. I oftentimes am kind of long-winded, so
No, well, it's so valuable, and there's so much in here for people to take and absorb, and I think work through and go link out to and go learn more about. That kind of leads me to this, and we'll kind of start to round the corner here, so I can let you get back to work.
Yeah.
How have things? I've been going back to when we met so many years ago. How would you say this space has evolved? I'm sure there are still things that are out of reach for you, that there's still challenges that we face, and there are probably some of the same challenges. But would you say sustainability in your industry, in the fashion industry, apparel industry, has it evolved? Has it changed? I know the answer, but how has it changed? How are they different from when you and I first met?
Yeah, I love that question, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of years now. And I had the benefit of when I joined Mohawk Industries 15, 16, I don't know how many years ago. Yeah, I've been doing product design and manufacturing for sustainability work on the corporate, for-profit, and the nonprofit side for, I think, 15 or 16 years now. And so when I came into it with Mohawk, because they were making flooring, carpet, tile, my job was to create strategies for ensuring the sustainability of the product, but also that it could get sourced and specified by architects and designers and building owners to get LEED certification. It was a real draw, right? The U.S. Green Building Council had assembled this amazing, platform and a standard to go with it that would say a building is going to be made to a certain specification and it's going to have a level, and your products can also contribute towards your higher level of LEED certification. And ultimately, LEED became kind of written in, or at least the specifications of LEED got written into building codes, and starting with the state of California here, but many others too that have followed, and globally. And it spurred other building initiatives, and it spurred other building movements as well, and standards and all that. So it's great. And I would say that movement has matured out of, matured out of its early stage to being table stakes, right? Because we just aren't building buildings, at least in the West. And let's figure out, I'm probably less informed to really make a comment on how buildings are being built around the entire globe. But I think that the whole globe is part of this green building movement. I mean, we saw countries all over the world that were part of the World Building Council. And so I got to watch that evolve, and it was table stakes. And it was now just how we build buildings. And I think that's the same movement that we're in now. And we've moved out of what I would call infancy into our adolescence. And in our adolescence, we're really focusing on what matters and being more meaningful, and really having tough conversations about, do we just throw a bunch of mud up against the wall and see what sticks, or money against the wall and see what sticks? Or do we really focus on taking those things that are proven and accelerating them more rapidly? And I see that across circular economy, next generation materials, carbon, land use, biodiversity, even social and labor initiatives. There's just so much more that I think has evolved. And what I get excited about is, as I've also said, once the financial markets see the opportunity in investing in any movement, and it definitely happened for architects, designers, green building. It was like, ooh, we're going to make a lot of money off this LEED thing, Once the markets could see that an investment in a greener building, yields higher rentals, higher retention of your, once you see that an investment in a sustainable product company or, brand retailer, you're going to see. And so we're getting to a point now where all the asset holders, financial institutions that own the outstanding shares of the fashion brands are really starting to evaluate what's in their portfolios. BlackRock, T. Rowe Price, Vanguard, pension funds, like they're getting into the ESG game now to say, how are we helping and enabling and incentivizing these companies that we own major shares of, maybe the largest share owner after the founders and the families? How are we ensuring that they are making this evolution? It's getting exciting because now people are seeing the opportunity to make money, that it's a smart investment, that it is the future. And it's about future-proofing the economy. It's about future-proofing global economies, and the way we make things, on our planet. And I think it's like systems change that gets super exciting. So that's where I think we are. I think we're in the part where now the money's waking up, and it's not just the philanthropy and the brand, sustainability budget. It's like the financial markets are going, okay, we can work with this. And now it's just about implementing and proving that these investments were wise and make sense. And it's happened for clean energy. So now it's going to happen for all this other stuff. I mean, that's the good news, is we have a model that it's happening in other parts of sustainability. And I think clean energy is such a big part of this work that we're doing too, like scaling clean energy access to these factories and farms is part of it. So I think once we start to look at, the cost of carbon being lowered, as we start to accelerate different interventions and getting more equity investors, more debt financiers, like all of them engaged in this work.
So I'm sensing some optimism. So that's good. That's that excites me.
Yeah.
What do you, after all these years, for all the effort that you've put in, that you continue to put in, is there anything that you think people still need to understand, or they're just not getting? Maybe brands, business owners, CFOs, investors. Is there always something that you're like, I wish people could understand that this or that? What do you want people to understand about this work?
Yeah, I think, I touched on a lot. I'm going to talk about the citizen for a minute, the consumer citizen, because I think that, demonizing corporations, demonizing capitalism, demonizing, existing business models without taking accountability or culpability on our own role within it. We're all accountable to the systems and the communities in the world that we live in. Unless you're an indigenous person who's part of the lever culture, then you're a taker.
Yeah.
Right? We're all takers. We're consumers of petroleum, we're consumers of electricity, we're consumers of water, all the stuff going in. And I think that it's really important that we shift as a collaborative society around what we want to build. And that the anger that we may feel from whatever vantage point we're sitting at towards the fear, like I was reading recently, that change is the event, but transition is the psychological and emotional piece that happens inside. We're in change, major change on this planet. And it's freaking scary because we don't know where we're going and how we're going to get there. And we're going to be asked to let go of a lot of the powerful systems we've created. We're already starting to see it in the male patriarchy and petroleum and coal. Like, systems are crumbling, and it is scary. And there's a power grab happening on the planet by those who are not ready to let go. So when we go through transition, the first thing that's going to happen is the old is going to begin to die off. And I think if all of us understand that we have a role, whether I'm a consumer, a citizen, we all are going to have to let go of something, whether I'm the shareholder, whether I'm the person who fixes the prices for, the purchasing, like whoever it is, something you're going to have to let go of something. You're going to have to adjust something. And then you're in the space of anger and fear. It's almost like a death or a mourning. You go through the stages of grief, and it is not fun. And we are all in it together, and we are going to not have fun in this space. But we've got to hold on, because the next space we're going to go to is the unknown. And the unknown is where we don't know where we're going. And we're going to continue. I think we're there right now. Actually, we're in the unknown, and we're still holding on to because you're going to grab for something so you don't drown. So you're grabbing to the past, and you're holding on. No, this is what worked. So we got to hold on, because I don't know what's going to replace it. Right. But what's going to begin to emerge if we have curiosity, if we have patience, and we have kindness to one another in this journey, what's going to be able to emerge are the new truths that fit under that universal truth we started talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
New truths are going to pop up, and they're going to look better to us now than they looked 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 12 years ago. They're going to look doable. They're going to look okay. They're going to look safe. And we're going to feel okay to grab them and pull ourselves out of those dark waters together. And we're going to rebuild a new system with these new truths. So hold on, everybody. Take a deep breath. Be kind to one another. We're in the unknown. We're still holding on to some of the old. We're going to be angry. We're going to be scared. Be patient. New truths are coming. And be a part of them. Get curious. Get excited.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful picture that you've just painted. And we can start to close with that. Louis, my last question for you would be, to somebody who wants a role like yours, a career like yours, a position like yours, or they want to be a part of this, they're kind of inching their way, they're pivoting. What advice do you have for people who want to be in this space and work and do good work like the work you're doing?
Yeah, it's different now because a lot of these jobs are here. When I was setting out, as we talked about at the beginning, I didn't know where I was going. But I just kept doing the things that brought me to life. I kept doing the things that I found passion and interest and curiosity, and I just kept trusting that if I do the things that bring me alive, as I said at the beginning, that I would follow that. So I think don't be afraid to write that person on LinkedIn, and say, I'm young, I'm learning, or I'm not young, I'm mid-career and I'm jumping ship,
Right.
Something different. You're going to send out a whole bunch of communication in the world, whether it's who you're talking to, who you're writing. Just start changing your narrative around the things that you want to do, and I firmly believe you'll start bringing in the right. For every 100 pieces of data you're putting out there about who you want and what you want, maybe 5 of them get returned, but just do it, and try to find yourself in the thing where you feel you can be most valuable. And, the conundrum at the beginning of careers, but even when you're transitioning in a career, is that you don't yet have the skills you need next. Use your career to be the teacher. All the stuff I've been talking about today, I just am learning. I'm the student on this journey, and I'm just sharing what I'm seeing, and it'll probably be very different, down the road. So always have the student mind, and always keep that and maintain that, whether you're 8 or 18 or 80. And, just keep learning and educating yourself, and just don't be afraid to go, I don't know it, but I'm going to learn it, and learn it on the job. And even say that, say powerful things like that when you're talking to people that you want to work with. Say powerful things about your passion and your dedication. It's not about your knowledge yet, and in fact, sometimes who we want on our teams are the people that are just going to roll up their sleeves and get in there and make it happen.
Well said, and really valuable insights. Louis, thank you so much for all of that energy, all of that wisdom you dropped. There's so many resources in here. I'm going to put the links to all of it in the notes so that people can go in and learn more and try to follow along with what you're doing, watch your podcast, listen to your show as well. A world of experience and influence. So thank you for everything you're doing, and I can't thank you enough for being here.
I feel the same way, Derek. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see each other in person soon. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Hey, thanks for listening. This is a show produced by The Underswell and our School of Understanding. If you're interested in being a part of this movement and want to dive deeper into the art of understanding sustainability better so that you can do things better, be sure to visit us at theunderswell.com. We offer structured, easy-to-follow workshops, courses, and member resources to make sustainability a part of your career or lifestyle. Because remember, no matter what role you play a role, and we're here for you. Thanks again.